And every girl left, but Ruth stayed, and then Ruth went outside to get some rain, and that's where we left off.
And that's where you left off. Here is a picture of the mom. So this is Naomi. So she and her husband Elimelech, for the ones of you who weren't here last week, there was a famine in the land of Bethlehem. So they had left and they'd gone to this other country. And when they got there, then when they got to the other country, they had 2 sons. He grew up and married 2 women. But then it didn't go very well for them. The dad died, the sons died, and then all that was left was Naomi and the wives of the sons, her 2 daughters-in-law. This is Orpah and this is Ruth. And so she told them, you know, you need to go back to your own homes because I'm not going to have any more sons for you to marry. And they said, you know, we love you. We want to go back to your land with you. Now, Naomi had heard that in Israel, God was being good to them and the famine was gone. In other words, now they had enough food. So Israel had turned back to God. And Naomi decided she wanted to turn back to God. So they had left Israel because times were hard, but God had brought them to this land and said, this land is for you. And it might not have been the right thing for them to leave, even though there was a famine, because God is always going to bless us. So sometimes we have problems, and the thing to do is just to solve them, not to run away from them. But they had left, they had gone to another country, but they kind of brought their problems with them. And the other country, they didn't worship God, and so that's not where God wanted them, because then when the boys grew up and they married these women, they were from this country, and the people who lived in this other country, Moab, they didn't know God, and that meant they would be bringing up their children who wouldn't know God either, and that's not God's way for us. We're only supposed to marry other people who know God. So this was just kind of a big mess, but Naomi wanted to turn back to God, and so she has decided she's going to go back to her home in Israel. And these 2 girls, Orpah decides she'll go, just like Max said, but Ruth says, don't ask me to go, wherever you go. Ruth had told her mother-in-law, Naomi, wherever you go, I will go. Wherever you die, I will die. I'll be buried where you bury. I'll just take care of you for the rest of your life. And she was very devoted to her, and she wanted to take care of her. Kind of like those plays in that game. She wanted to give her good things, or kind of like our memory verse. Honor your father and your mother. Even though she wasn't married to her son anymore, she still honored her mother and wanted to take care of her. So this is Ruth, and she ends up staying with Naomi, and they go back to Bethlehem. Now this was a really hard journey. It was a long walk. They had to go uphill most of the way. And they get there, and it's right in the middle, it's right at the beginning, actually, of the barley harvest. So who knows what barley is?
Ooh, what's barley?
Bread.
I don't know. It's like wheat that you make bread with.
Right. And so, exactly right,
You're
Erin.
smart.
So here they were,
didn't
all
even know
these
that.
people are harvesting all this barley, and they pick it up, it comes in sheaves like this wheat, and they put it together in bundles. That's what a sheaf is called. Naomi and Ruth get there, and they're talking, and Naomi tells Ruth, Ruth says, you know, Naomi, I want to go out tomorrow and pick up some grain for you, so we'll have food. And Naomi said, okay, you can go. Just go behind where the men are harvesting in the fields. Go. So first the men would go out, and they would get all the big things, and then the women would come after, and they would pick up what was left. And so here was Ruth, and she was picking up what was left, and she followed after the women just like Aaron said, you can make
Bread
oatmeal
out of
like out of it, you can
Cause they
make
didn't have
bread.
McDonald's back then.
They didn't have McDonald's, you can make cookies, you can make cupcakes, you can make
Back then you
tortillas,
can make
make a
something
lot.
sweet.
you can make something sweet. So,
Anywhere you can make a
so,
fire.
here she goes, and you know what? God is so awesome. This is a story with me and Pastor Annie. This was an accident. This was God leading Ruth to this man's field, just like God led me to this church. Now, like when you go to Costco, usually you go there and you buy salad, or you buy chicken. I went to Costco one day, and that's how I met Pastor Annie, and I have a navy blue car, and she had a navy blue thing to organize your trunk, and I started talking to her, and I said, yeah, I just moved here, and I really haven't found a church yet. And she says, well, we have a church, and we believe in this and that, and we believe in the baptism of the Holy Spirit. I'm like, oh, yay!
She danced.
So I found a church at Costco. Do you think God led me to Pastor Annie? I didn't just, yes, absolutely. So God led Ruth to this man Boaz's field. And he says, and so he talks to his laborers, and he says, who is this girl? And they said, you know, she's taking care of her mother, Naomi, and she's come here. She was this, her husband died, Naomi's son, her husband died, and so she came back to take care of Naomi. So, he said, okay, this is what I want you to do. And he directed his workers to not only let Naomi pick up extra, but to leave things like whole sheaves for her to take from. And he told Naomi, you follow after my women, and then you can visit with them, and I'll tell my men not to bother you. And when you're thirsty, you come over here, and you can have something to drink. And so when it came lunchtime, she came over there, and he invited her to have food too. So she got here, and she has her lunch. Now, there's Ruth in her purple
tall.
outfit. She is tall. And so Ruth goes home, and she tells Naomi, you know what happened? So first of all, let me tell you, this is hard work. They got to pick up from the morning, like when the very first sunrise till it's completely dark, and all day long, they're picking up these little pieces of grain. And then when they get them all together, they tie them up like this. And then at the end of the harvest, they thresh them out and get the little seeds, and then they put those in a bag, and then they make flour out of those. So it was hard work. At the end, she goes home to Naomi, and she says, you know what? This man named Boaz, he let me pick in his field, and he gave me lunch. And she says, you know what? Boaz is our relative. And in that time, women couldn't work. If you were married, your husband provided for you. Or if you had a son, he could provide for you. But if you didn't have a son who could work and earn money, or if you didn't have a husband who could work and earn money, you didn't have any food or any place to live. And you had to just, if people gave you food, then that's what you had. So, she says tonight, she went home to Naomi, she said, you know, this man Boaz, he told me I could stay in his field. I wound up in his field. She didn't just wind up in his field, because he was her relative. And so say there was a marriage and the husband died, then the husband's brother was supposed to marry the woman and carry on the line.
It was her husband's cousin, not her cousin.
And the way this worked, it was to keep it was to protect the person, the woman's person. It was to protect her property, the land she owns, so it would stay in her family, and it was to protect the children. And so Naomi says, you know what? Boaz is our relative. You stay there, because he he can take care of you. So she went for the whole barley harvest and the whole wheat harvest. So for 6 weeks, they worked together all day long. And so here's Boaz. He sees her working all the time. He kind of got his eyes on her.
Like you
And-
think she's cute?
I think he thought she was pretty. Yeah. I think, oh, well. But anyway,
She
so,
thought she was a pretty girl.
And she's supposed to stay with him.
and she's supposed to, because that's what her
That
mother
is true. You're paying
told her,
attention.
and she
Good
was
job.
honoring her mother, and she did everything her mother said. So here they are, harvesting and harvesting away, and,
And it was a hot sun, right?
it was hot, it was really hot. And so, and then every night Naomi would go home and talk to her, her mother-in-law and tell her, don't face each other, what was going on. But during the day, you know, here's Ruth, and she's hanging out with Boaz in her purple outfit. See that, Marianelle? And they're eating together, and they're getting to know each other. So, yeah, so then, they keep harvesting, and then everybody keeps getting more and more barley and more wheat. And then,
That was like money back then, right?
it was, you're right. So then it came time to thresh. And threshing is this picture.
I wish that was their money.
So I'm gonna take down some of these
We're
because
gonna go back to
they
that.
take their, they take all their sheaves. Everybody say sheave.
Sheed.
And then they go and thresh it.
Done this.
So they beat it up with a broom, and it makes the little seeds come out of these, wheat things.
So they
These
just hit
bundles
it.
of wheat. Yeah, they just slap it around. And I guess, I'm not seeing it, but then the little, you know what a grain of rice looks like? Yeah, so,
Small.
yeah, so this little grains of wheat and barley come out. So, it's the end of the harvest, and Naomi is talking to her mother-in-law Ruth, and, Ruth is talking to her mother-in-law Naomi, here. And Naomi says, you know what, this is what you do. You take a bath so that you don't smell like you've been working in the farm all day, and you put on perfume, and you put on a pretty dress, your very best dress, and then you go and you lay underneath at his feet after he's already finished his dinner. So he's not hungry anymore, he's all full and happy. And you go down to Boaz's feet, and then, just lift up the corner of covers off of his feet, and you lie right down there at his feet. So,
Did he see her do it?
no, he was asleep. And Ruth, you know, she had been with Naomi now in this culture for a while, and she had come to learn that Boaz was could be her kinsman redeemer, which is what Pastor Jared said, which means that he could buy her and take care of her. But, so she didn't come up to him and say, you know what, my husband died and it's your job to take care of me. She didn't act that way. She was very humble. And so she just went down at the bottom of his feet. She did what her mother-in-law said, and it was nighttime, and after he had eaten and he had fallen asleep, she took the covers off his feet and she just went to sleep down there right by his feet. Well, then he wakes up. So here's Ruth. He was there sleeping because he was guarding his grain because it was the end of the harvest. So here is Ruth in her pretty purple dress, all fixed up. And she goes and she lays down underneath his feet. And he wakes up and he's like, what's going on? And Naomi had told her, he'll tell you what to do about marriage. So Ruth just told him, she said, you're my close relative, and my husband died. And you can buy me and my lands. And he said, okay. He said, you know, I have seen what good care you have taken of mother-in-law, Naomi. So he had heard about her character. And so not only was she pretty, we're thinking she was pretty, we really don't know what she looked like. But in the Bible, what it says, and we do know, is that he had heard about how she took good care of her mother-in-law. So he had heard that she was a good person, a good character. And just like if you wanna grow apples, you put an apple seed in the ground and you get an apple tree. Or if you wanna grow barley, you put the barley seed in the ground, you get a barley tree. If you want kindness, you sow kindness. And she had been very kind to her mother, and this was her reaping what she had sown. So he says, you know, I've seen how well you're taking care of your mother. He says, and I am proud of you that you didn't go after any young men. Apparently he was older. You could have, gone after, you could have checked out other young people, but he said, you just took care of your mother and you work hard. He appreciated that. He said, I will take care of this matter tonight. Now you go home in the morning. And so he gave her 6 ephahs, or it says 6 measures. Actually, I didn't tell you, the very first day when she went home from harvesting with him in his field, she went home with a whole ephah. And an ephah is about 2.5 gallons. So this is about 2.5 gallons of candy.
Wow.
But you know how,
How'd she carry it all?
I know. But, and then that morning, after she had slept at his feet, he gave her 6 measures. I don't know if he gave her 6 of these. He told her to open up her scarf and stuff. And she carried it home. But anyway, it's kind of like, to me, it sounded like a bride price. Like he was already saying, I'm giving you this dowry.
Yeah.
But anyway, so this is about how much ephah is, about 2.5 gallons. Now, you know how rice is so little, but if you cook it, it grows bigger? Can you imagine this much of barley? How many cookies or loaves of bread or cupcakes or pancakes or oatmeal or all that stuff it would make. So that was a lot of food for her mother.
It was apple pie.
So this is what happens. This was her scarf. He told her in the morning, he said, take 6 measures. So she filled her scarf up with all of that barley, and she goes home. Oh, here's her sleeping. I didn't show it. This is her asleep down there. All right. So the next day, he goes right to the gate. This is a man who takes care of business. So here's Naomi, here's Ruth, and they're waiting. They're waiting to see how is this situation
If
going to
he's
work
gonna
out.
marry her?
Because she doesn't know this, but what actually was going on is there's another man who's even a closer relative. So he goes to the gate, and now I gotta put up the gate. So there's in the big cities back then, everybody would meet at the gate to do business. This is where, you go in and out of the city. I'm gonna put this over.
If you do the top first, it'll stick a little easier.
Alright, so here's Ruth and Naomi, and they're waiting at home to hear how it all is gonna work out. And so Boaz goes to the gate of the city, and this is where all the men would go to conduct business. You'd go in and out of the city through these gates, and if you have to go through the gate to get in, so that's where they would meet. So Boaz comes up and he says, Ruth, who came here with Naomi, has taken good care of her mother, and she's lost her husband. Now he says to this man here, who we don't know his name because he wasn't given any honor because he turned her down. But he says to this man, you're her closest relative. You're her kinsman redeemer. If you want, you can buy all her lands. And he says, okay, I'll buy them. Well, of course, everybody wants more, bigger farm. But he says, okay, great. But when you buy the lands, you also gotta take Ruth and marry her. Well, he didn't want to do that because then when they had children, those children could inherit his farm, and then he was afraid that he would lose some of his farm. So he said, no, I can't do it. So back in that day, what they would do to signify that contract is they would take off their shoe. Now, his shoe was right here in my thing, and it might be,
Oh, I think it dropped to the floor.
it might be,
Is that his shoe?
this is his shoe. Thank you for your good eyes. So here's his shoe. So he took his shoe off, and
That's a big shoe.
that's the sign of his,
It's like a-
he said, well, I'll just take my shoe off. He says, okay, this is a sign of my contract. You can have her. I give her to you. And so Boaz says, okay. And then this guy goes out of the picture and his shoe. And Boaz tells all the men, he says, all right, in the front of all you witnesses, I want you to know, I am going to marry Ruth, and I'm going to buy her land. And so he did. And they had a baby. Aw.
Little baby.
And there's more to that. So he took her into his home. Here's him, and here's Ruth. And then here is their home. And then here's Naomi with their
You'll know.
baby.
You
The
won't.
baby
Baby
drops.
just fell on the stage.
The baby dropped. So now I gotta tell you something. Who this baby was? The baby was named Obed, but the baby grew up and married, and his son was named Jesse. And Jesse grew up and married, and his son was named David. And David was the king of Israel.